Hi. We are joined by Johnny, who is otherwise known as the Anxious Fireman, and he's, agreed to come onto the podcast and talk a little bit about mental health and what he's been doing. And I'm really excited to hear about it. So, welcome, Johnny.
Hello. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So do you want to just sort of start talking about, I know you said there were a couple of things you really wanted to hit on, which I was quite keen on because we're coming into Men's Health Week, month, I should say. So take it away.
Yeah, well, again, thanks for having me. My name is Johnny, and my stage name, as it's sort of lovingly been sort of known now, is the Anxious Fireman. To give myself I'll give you a bit of background about myself. I have served for 13 years in the Fire and Rescue Service up here in the Northwest. I don't give the name of the service, and that is not for any other reason than I kind of keep it separate from this business, if you like. They've never told me to. They've never kind of said that I'm not allowed to. I just find it sort of, keeps things a bit separate. But it's the big one in the Northwest, so you can probably take a punt. I've served there for 13 years, and for the first good half of that, I served with, very few problems, very few kind of issues. I was loving the job, loving my life, loving my home life, loving traveling and doing all the sort of things that people do and all those sort of things. And then about 7 years ago, I sort of took on quite a bit, started getting quite stressed. And some other things that I'm going to later if you wish, but other things from sort of my past started to rear its head. And I started struggling with these panic attacks. So I started having these panic attacks sort of mainly at night, and I would lie in bed and it was just sort of like dump, 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 dump. Heart would go a mile a minute. And like most blokes, and I guess we're going to kind of get onto this bit as well later, I ignored it and shit myself, at the same time. And what I certainly did was not tell anybody about it. So there was a good few months where basically I was having these sort of panic attacks, especially at night, where I wouldn't tell anybody. What I did, however, do was end up in A&E about 20 times maybe. So they're saying there's something wrong with me. I was absolutely convinced it was physical. And again, I think that sort of relays back to kind of my perception as a man. Bearing at this point, I'd done no real mental health training or kind of awareness and stuff like that. So it was all very new to me. Until sort of one day, eventually, a doctor that I'd seen at my GP rolled over and kind of tapped me on my head and said, "You realise this is inside there, don't you?" And it was a big shock. It was a big hit to me. It was a really big hit to my kind of male ego. It was a big hit to my kind of confidence and, to kind of who I perceived myself to be. And it took me a while to get my kind of head around that it was something that was driven kind of mentally, if you like. Now, whilst that was kind of okay, I kind of did get to terms with it reasonably quickly. But what really kind of hit me was now I'd gone from kind of a place of good mental health, if you like, to a place of bad mental health where I was having these panic attacks and starting to get sicker and sicker as I sort of got more and more afraid of them and worried about them. Where I feel for me it became like a mental illness is when I started to worry about them happening. And it's there where what I now know we would call is panic disorder with agoraphobia. So I'm afraid of having panic attacks in public places or around places where I would feel uncomfortable and trapped and unsafe and all that sort of stuff. So if you can see the sort of the shift between sort of going from good mental health to bad mental health to then a disorder, and the disorder was basically me becoming anxious of being anxious. And if you want a kind of a way of understanding that, if you've ever been on a really long bush journey and you really don't want to need a piss and you keep thinking about needing a piss and then all of a sudden you need a piss, that's anxiety disorder. And 101, that is panic disorder with agoraphobia. You're basically bringing it on yourself. And where it really hit me was work. Sorry, go ahead. I kind of interrupted you there. I apologize.
No, it's fine. I'm sitting here and I'm sort of normally I'm sort of chatting away, but I'm just listening because what you're saying is what happened to me.
Okay.
So I've had the same journey. I had a house, a life, a business, and life was good. And then it's like, I don't know, it's just like you wake up one day and then all of a sudden something just doesn't seem right. And I was having nightmares, and then the next thing I knew, I was having panic attacks. So it's this is so therapeutic for me in a way, because I can completely relate to what you went through. And I have been diagnosed with a panic disorder. So I just want to say, it just completely resonates. And mine was caused from previous trauma as well. So so carry on.
Yeah, well, high five. It's a good club to be in.
Yeah. T-shirt.
Yeah, absolutely. The old panic disorder T-shirt. It's always a good one. So where it really hit me was work. So, being a firefighter and sort of, a roughy tufty kind of firefighter, and where it really, really affected me was within that kind of arena, where I would go into work and I would be, when I really think back, I was terrified. I was terrified of having panics in front of the other guys, basically. I mean, I'm trying to think of another way of putting it, but ultimately that's what it was. It was that kind of existential fear of, well, what would they think? How would they judge me? Would I be able to do my job? And then you start going down the whole rabbit hole of, well, what if I can't do this job? What will I do? Will I lose my home? Will I lose, my income? What will I, and you start, call it catastrophizing now in therapy, but, really catastrophizing about what could have happened. So, and all that combined would therefore bring on the panic. So, I would, like I say, get anxious about being anxious, panic about panic, and it's there where the disorder is. And the best way I can describe it to anyone who was, well, other than the taking a piss sort of analogy, is it sounded to me, it felt to me like a CD player was being pressed in my head, and I had absolutely no control over it. People always say, sort of, well, just don't think about it, or just get over it, or whatever it is with mental health. And it really felt to me like someone was, or something was pressing a button in my head that I had no control over. And it was therefore kicking in these thoughts that I could not stop, and they would get worse and worse and worse and worse. And the more I tried to ignore them, the more I tried to push them away, the more I tried to fight them, just the more powerful they got. And it would, it would destroy me, really. And
I often, sorry to interrupt, I often say that my mind is like a hamster on speed.
Yeah.
And that's how it feels. You can't stop it, and it just goes and goes and goes and goes and goes and goes, and it's exhausting. So yeah, I like the CD analogy as well.
Yeah. Do I always, I'll come with the story, and then I'll sort of go to some other things, just so it doesn't get kind of broken up. But so where that led me to in essence taking up drinking, a lot more than I had done before. I started drinking at home at first, and then a bit more after work, and then sometimes in the day if I was off, and eventually it led me to kind of drinking at work, where I would sort of have, not a lot, I was never hammered if you like, but I'd just have a little sip of this or a little sip of whiskey or something, just to kind of take that anxiety edge off. And genuinely in my kind of mind, it felt like I was better, a little bit tipsy than anxious, like I was better at my work, I was calmer, I was more in control, and in that kind of odd way it sort of made sense to me. So again, people who get into sort of alcohol problems, I can really understand that mechanism now, whereas before I may have been quite judgmental about it, just stop drinking, just get over it. And I can really understand the mechanism that would lead somebody to go down that path, especially if you didn't have a support network. Now, I was very fortunate that I did. Once I kind of got to the point where I thought, this is getting, ridiculous now, I'm drinking, at work and things like that. I sought help. I went to therapy. I went back to the GP and started taking medication. I'd kind of opened up about it. And I very, very quickly kind of realized that once I was kind of honest and open about it, 99% of it seemed to disappear. As soon as I remember one of the biggest days where I told the watch, a fire crew's called a watch, and I told my watch, and I expected this, I don't know what I expected, like some sort of reaction, and in essence there was none. It was like, okay, that's fine, Johnny, that's not an issue at all. And just sort of hearing that was like, oh my God, I've been building this up for you have no idea how long. And that, I mean, come on, give me something. That's like an anticlimax, like I wanted a parade or something, just, they were just sort of like, look, great, we need to go and do the toast. What are you on about? It was almost like it was such a non-issue for them that I was so relieved. And that I still remember that day where I just felt like, half my body fell off because I was carrying so much weight that had just kind of vanished. And then, from that kind of being honest led to me starting a Twitter account, which I don't really have anymore, but it was called the Anxious Fireman. So I started a Twitter account called the Anxious Fireman, and I started tweeting about my experiences with anxiety, and that kind of expression really helped me kind of come to terms with it. And then I realized, my God, there's a whole world of people struggling with anxiety out there, which I never kind of realized. And, believe it or not, it's a pretty massive thing. But then from that, I went on to do some public speaking. I was on a few shows. I was on Radio 4 on sort of like the mailroom and things like that, and some other podcast events. From that, I sort of trained to be a mental health first aid instructor. I thought, well, I did a course and then thought, well, I could probably add a bit to this, and did the instructor course. And then sort of to finish it off, I trained to be a psychotherapist, which took about 4 or 5 years. So I'm now switched it around, and I'm kind of on the other side of it now, treating people for mental health conditions now. So and the name stuck with me, so I'm still the Anxious Fireman mental health training, if everyone wants to find me. But the name and the little black dog in the red fire truck has kind of stuck with me through it all. So yeah.
Amazing. That's amazing. Wow.
So that's me in a nutshell, I guess.
I do I love the black dog analogy as well, because obviously black dog is so prominent for mental health.
Yeah.
And
do you know where that's from?
The black it's a charity, isn't it, the Black Dog?
So there is a charity, but the original kind of place that the black dog came from is from Winston Churchill, who was a bipolar sufferer, and he called his depressive moods his black dog.
Yeah.
I think about this when I had mental health first training, and they did the video, and it really hit home, because obviously all of us on this chat have gone through something, but it's crazy. I'm going to be honest, Johnny, I love how you've put all your information that you've just explained, basically half of your life in 11 minutes, and how you've done it was in such a nice way. Like, their analogies, some people make them sound so scary, but how you did made it feel like real life, like understandable. Do you know what I mean? So I think that was, thank you.
No, you're very welcome. Thank you.
Well, yeah. So now that you're sort of, how does it all fit in with what you do? And sort of, I know that a big percentage of what I'm wanting to one of the things I am wanting to focus on with the hub is men. Because like you say, we have the stereotypical idea that a man has to be super masculine and out of touch with feeling. And I have a little boy, and I've, raised him from very young to be compassionate, and that crying is okay and feelings are okay. And because I don't want him to ever grow up and be in the position where he's perhaps, because, like you've explained, and like I've sort of said a little bit about my story, and like yourself, it was my story that has made me realize that I can't ask people to say that it's okay not to be okay, and to sort of all do these things if I'm still hiding behind my own. And so I stepped out and reached out to press, and I said that this is, I haven't gone into the nitty-gritties of my sort of story, but I've kind of explained how I got to where I did and what's inspired me to sort of start this charity. And you touched a bit about it in your first sort of, when we were talking about the masculinity side of things and how you kind of were ashamed. I mean, I felt very much the same. I was very embarrassed. I was at the time I was in a relationship, and I felt like they wouldn't want to be with me anymore because, I would be, damaged goods, and it's an embarrassment to have mental health. And because, like yourself, I didn't know a great deal about mental health until it almost felt like the world came out from under my feet and I dropped into Alice in Wonderland kind of scenario. And it's about now, like yourself, I'm sort of, I didn't know who I was. Like, who was I? Because the person I was before wasn't the person I am now with this diagnosis. And so I've had to rediscover who I am. And, and it's there may be people listening and think, oh my gosh, yeah, that I feel a bit like that. You do when you first sort of start to become unwell or start to sort of suffer with symptoms of mental health. You do kind of get to that point where you sort of don't know how this is going to affect your life and that sort of thing. So take it away, because you're doing such a good job. I feel like I don't even have to prompt you. I could just sit and listen to you.
No, it's all right. And, there's a few things that you said there that I think is really important. And I think the first one is that you're quite right that this isn't purely a male problem at all. I mean, I think, the whole masculinity thing is an enormous debate. And the term toxic masculinity is used quite a lot. And I kind of push back against that. I get why people would call it that, and I understand there's the premise behind it. I do think, however, that from my perspective, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be male or a man or masculine or all those sorts of things, but it's when those certain elements of it, those certain kind of holds or those certain kind of prisons from within it can really start to damage your health. I mean, ultimately, the way depression and anxiety for me are illnesses of thought. That's really where they are. But your thoughts are created through your experience of the world around you, genetics, through your experiences, where you've been, who you've seen, who you've met. Mm-hmm. And I was no different. I'd grown up in a world where I'd always played rugby. I'd been in the sort of the armed forces and the fire service and all these sorts of things. So my world had shifted to a world where, or my perception of the world, if you like, had shifted to a place where things like being weak and vulnerable was not really not accepted, maybe is the wrong word, but kind of expected. Or to succeed, you have to sort of portray this. But all that really is a societal image. It's an idea. That's it. But our brains are idea machines. They pick up what society tells us, and we try and live within it because that's the safest way to do it. Yeah. We're all, I mean, I don't want to get too existential on this, but we're all kind of born onto a planet and we have absolutely no fucking idea what we're doing. And the way we learn is through our experience and through, our perceptions and ideas from others. And if that's built up in a certain way, then your mind will build up sort of defenses in a certain way. And when they get challenged, well, then your body tries to protect itself, hence anxiety. So, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with masculinity, but it's the sort of the dangerous parts of it that I think can be a problem, which, definitely needs to change. And it's nice to hear that you're sort of letting your son be like that. That sounds really important. Because from my experience, through my experience of kind of anxiety and then definitely depression, the only way you're going to get through it, medication can help, therapy can help, absolutely, but the only way is through expression. So for me, expression is the opposite of depression. Depress, you need to express. It's not happiness. People think that the opposite of depression and anxiety is happiness, and that is just but an emotion we can feel. Really, the opposite of depressing is expressing. So talking to people. That's why Mind and all these charities tell people to talk or have a conversation in a chat. It's not just a nonsense. What it's actually doing is letting people express, and therefore neurologically our brain will kind of rewire itself to kind of make a more kind of relaxed or fuller picture of the world around us, rather than one that we kind of make ourselves through fear. And I think that if I hadn't started doing that, if I hadn't started tweeting and telling people and being honest, I still wear the little green lapel on my uniform for mental health. If I hadn't come out, almost like coming out, it was like a coming out party kind of thing. But for
yeah.
And I think genuinely, if I hadn't done that, I'd have been. I'm not sure where I'd have been if I'd even been here anymore. I'm not sure I would have been, because I was getting quite sick. Really, I was getting quite poorly.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think for me, expression is the opposite of depression, not happiness.
I love that. I actually do. Do you have any questions, Fire?
No,
Sorry, I felt like I cut you off then.
No, it's just, I just thought that was amazing. Because I'm going to be honest, even though I feel like obviously Vanessa, you've obviously told your story, and even though sometimes I want to tell mine, I'm always a bit like, oh no, I can't, because I'm too scared. But really, I feel like when you do release it, it does make you feel better. You might feel stupid for a little bit, because you feel like you're taking people's time like that. But I feel like in the long run, the people that you're telling care, and time isn't wasted. But I think that's really, really good thing, that it's not happiness.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
happiness is
Sorry.
a great place to be, but it's not a given. It's a lovely place to kind of aim for, but I think sometimes, and I mean, I don't want to get kind of too millennial hating here, but I think sometimes it can kind of be kind of expected a little bit. We go down the whole social media argument if you want and all the other sort of things, but kind of happiness is this sort of ideal, or it's not even an ideal anymore. It's not something people strive for. It's something people expect, and when they don't get it, it can be a big kick. And we can go down the line of sort of medicalizing mental health as well. As a person-centered sort of existential therapist, I would never kind of medicalize an illness. I would sort of draft it as an experience that somebody has. Yes, there are severe mental illnesses, things like psychosis or, bipolar, where there's a sort of pragmatic, I nearly use the word broken, and I really don't mean to use that word, but something that is sort of functionally wrong. Wrong, again, I don't need to use that word either.
Yeah,
but
it's more of a physical
Yeah.
sort of ailment, because obviously with bipolar and schizophrenia and all of these things, that they actually are sort of could be related to hormones. They could be related to chemicals and all of those sorts of things. So, there are times where within mental health, and I just want to put that out there really quickly, is that, you do need to take your medication. And I am I'm sort of a bit of both.
Yeah.
I need my medication, because if I don't take my medication, I go down the rabbit hole very, very quickly.
Sure.
And that is, obviously that's been looked into as to whether or not that is a more physical, because obviously genetics, again, I've written it down because, I come from a family with bipolar disorder and stuff like that. So, I know what you're saying is, obviously you need to take the medication. You do need to take the medication.
Yeah.
But equally, there's sort of so many different levels of mental health. And there seems to be this sort of go-to that no matter where you are on the spectrum, even if you just, perhaps have gone through a part of your life which you're anxious about or struggling, or there's been a massive change, you get tablets thrown at you. Where actually, by using a more sort of look inside, process, talk, and sort of heal, you can avoid going on to medication that could potentially then be harder to come off.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of make clear what I meant there. I didn't mean when I said medicalize, I didn't mean sort of use medication. I meant kind of almost diagnose. I think sometimes mental health or bad mental health is very quick to be diagnosed. So if people are sort of feeling down or they're feeling anxious about things, so let's take anxiety let's take my story for a good example. Well, I could be, or I was, diagnosed with anxiety disorder, with panic disorder, with a sort of agoraphobia. Well, actually, it was really just my experience of the world, wasn't it? Whereas you could very, very quickly sort of diagnose it, and then that's it. I'm kind of written off. I'm done. And for me, especially, that gave me a label. Well, the problem with a label is you then live up to the label, don't you? So you sort of live up to the almost the badge that you're now given. And I'm not for 1 second if people, I take antidepressants still. I still do. I would never sort of. I don't mean kick the habit of those. They can be very, very useful tools, absolutely, but they are a tool. When I say medicalize, I mean things that maybe could just be an experience of somebody or somebody's kind of experience of the world around them gets very quickly labeled with a diagnosis, and I'm not always sure that's helpful.
I totally agree with that, because I hate it when one of my pet hates is when do you know when like someone's maybe having a bad day, they'll be like, someone loses a temper, they'll go, oh God, aren't they bipolar? Oh God, aren't they depressed? Or why are you being all depressed? Why are you down now? When they use names like that, that does or do you know what I mean? When they're using medical terms for no, like you said, it could just be a bad experience. It could just be a bad day. It could just, when it could be held, when they use names like that, when they do medicalize it, that is wrong. Because you wouldn't do that with anything else. You wouldn't go with someone, you wouldn't go, oh God, if they're forgetting something, or you've got dementia, or like that. They wouldn't. They just go, you're forgetful. So the names that they use, I completely agree with what you're trying to say there.
Yeah, and also again, if we go back to the whole premise that sort of happiness is but an emotion, depression and anxiety are completely normal human states. They are, anxiety especially, the more I learn about it, the more you realize that it is the most normal emotion you can feel. It's shit, it's horrible, but it's there to protect you. And as a general rule, anxiety, the fight flight mechanism, the release of adrenaline, if your body's doing that, it's doing it to tell you something. It's, the body it holds the score, and it very rarely lies to you. It's probably the only thing you'll ever meet that will be ever 100% honest with you, your body. And if you're having, I know I was having panic attacks because something was wrong. I wasn't having them because I was ill. I was having them because something was deeply sort of wrong within my sort of psyche. And it's there where I think, it can be, go to the doctor, I feel anxious, go to the doctor, I feel depressed. I'm not suggesting for 1 second you shouldn't do that. But it can be very quick to sort of see anxiety and depression as an instant negative that we shouldn't feel. That almost that they're sort of, the second you feel like that, we need to cut that off. That's wrong.
Yeah.
And they're not. They're telling you something. Those emotions are there to guide you and tell you something, and we can become afraid of them. And it's here where real healing starts. Where if you can start to learn to sort of be with them and accept them and learn from them, then they stop being so scary. And the wolf at the door is never as frightening when you actually meet it. So.
Yeah, and it takes me back to a conversation that I had when I was admitted with a psychologist, and we kind of talked a lot about this window of resilience, and I talk about it a lot when I speak to anybody. I was like, well, you need to look at your window of resilience, and anybody is bound to have anxiety, and that's what I say to people. The anxiety I have is triggered by traumatic events that have kind of resurfaced, and so effectively I'm sort of reliving everything again.
Yeah.
So that in itself causes my anxiety and my sort of fear and panic. So when people say, oh, I'm really anxious, especially what's going on at the moment with COVID, I know quite a few people I know have lost their jobs, and they're like, oh, I don't know what's going to happen. And I said, you have to look at that window of resilience. Like, what is it that you have control over? You don't control what happens outside. You don't control what's going to happen, and you can't change what's already happened. All you can control is what's in that window of resilience. And it's very much talked about in PTSD therapy,
Yes.
sort of when you have a really sort of small window of resilience, you're hypervigilant. I am a hypervigilant person, so I'll be triggered by sounds or or crowds or aggression or anything like that. And she even said to me, she said, I will be honest, even before we were on lockdown, I used to really struggle to leave the house. Only because I used to get really anxious, and then it's like you say, your mind starts to play all these scenarios, and you just think, oh, it's just easy staying indoors. So I'd worked really hard to put myself in positions where I was going out and I was making plans and things, so that I was building and expanding that window of resilience. And that's exactly how what you were saying. And I'm so glad you said it, because it kind of backs up what I've been saying to people, like you do need to, in a safe and controlled way, face what's causing the anxiety in order to almost let it not have that power.
Yeah.
Sort of, and this is, again, one of the things I said to sort of service users who've come into the hub is, it's about you controlling your mental health and not letting your mental health control you.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree, and I think that word power is really important. The mind is the most powerful thing in the known universe. I mean, watch this space, but as far as we're aware, it is the most powerful thing that we sort of have access to, and yet we only control a small percentage of it. And there's something I always do with either clients or on mental health sort of training courses that I run. I always ask the question. People always think, well, you should be able to control your mind. You should be able to control these emotions. You should be able to control this and that. And I always put it to them that, put your hand up if you decided how tall you were going to be. Put your hand up if you decided what color hair you were going to have. Put your hand up if when you ate your breakfast this morning, you decided how to digest that food. Put your hand up if you decided how, big your hands were going to be, or what, how your hair was going to grow or not, like mine, all these sort of different things. or what you know, if you need some extra energy, how you kick that in your body, or when you breathe, do you decide how the alveoli in your lungs takes the oxygen out? You have pretty much no control of the body that you were in, pretty much none. You know, we like to sort of assume this control of our world around us, and this is what the COVID, I think, has really kind of brought home, is the sort of lack of control we actually have of the universe around us. And when I say universe, I don't mean kind of stars and galaxies. I mean, you know, the room outside your door, the people outside, the world that we inhabit. You know, and even down to our minds, you know, we have minimal control over what it is to sort of exist in the human experience, and that really is all it is. And part of that experience, unfortunately, is negative emotion. You know, that will be triggered in down to the world around us. You know, it really is. So to sort of let go of it sometimes can be really powerful as well, because otherwise you can sort of almost create this false power that, you know, isn't really there. And that, you know, and that can be really important, sort of accepting our limited role in all of this in a way.
Yeah, what we can control. So tell us a little bit now about what's the plan for yourself. You know, what have you sort of got coming up? And you know, if anybody's listening and they were interested in getting in touch with you, we will put all your contact details on the video. But you know, sort of what is the rest of, well, what we can sort of make of 2020? I'm writing it off and just having my birthday next year and just forgetting I even turned a year older. So yeah, so tell us what the plan is. Like, do you have anything in store or coming up next year? Or
I don't really plan that far ahead, if I'm honest. I mean, the whole company and therapy and becoming a therapist and all that has just kind of happened. I never really planned it. It just kind of was. And I just keep bouncing from kind of work to work. I've got a couple of jobs sort of doing kind of manager training and how to support staff over the next couple of weeks. I am hopefully just about to start as a therapist for Anxiety UK. You know, a big shout out for them. Yeah, so yeah, I want to, you know, I'm hoping I can become a kind of referral therapist for them, so people will be sent to me with, you know, anxiety conditions, as well as sort of running the private practice, and then, you know, being a firefighter. So, you know, cracking on with that, I suppose. Kind of talking wise, I've started not a podcast, kind of like a really shoddy YouTube channel that, you know, I'm going to see if I can build it up and bang some stuff on LinkedIn. The next sort of topic I'm really thinking about is kind of toxic positivity. And that's something that's really resonated with me a little bit. And it was brought by, well, not brought, you know, a guy that I like on LinkedIn, who I'm going to give another shout out to, which is Josh Connolly. We've never met. I've only sort of liked his posts a few times and sort of said a few things. So, you know, we're not like best buddies or anything, you know, but he was talking the other day about sort of toxic positivity. And for me, it's very similar to kind of toxic masculinity. There's nothing wrong with being positive, you know, positive psychology within itself. There's nothing sort of intrinsically wrong with it. But, you know, when you see these sort of posters of like you know, an iceberg and 3/4 of it's under the ocean, you know, they always succeed. For me, it's just another way of punishing yourself to suggest that, well, I need to succeed even if it's hard, and I have to succeed, and success is the only way forward. And my God, you know, if this person has done it, I can, and keep pushing the limits and all this shit. You know, I just sort of think, no, you know, the way to better health, the way to keep yourself well is through connection and vulnerability. The more you can learn to connect with people and the more you can be vulnerable around them, the stronger we are as a team. And for me, that's something that I certainly learned in the fire service. The more more I opened up honestly about sort of my struggles and anxieties and stuff, the more people opened up to me. And lo and behold, the stronger we became as a team, the stronger we were as a unit. You know, so for me, you know, that ability to connect with people, make deep, meaningful connections is 10 times better than, you know, giving someone some sort of shit poster with, you know, kind of always reach your goals on it. You know, it's fine. Being positive is fine. You know, success is fine. But for me, it's just another way of, you know, there's mental health scores going around now. You know, I am 7 out of 10 mental health and all this sort of thing. And again, I can just see it becoming like a contest, and I can't get my head around it. For me, it's about accepting our vulnerabilities and working with that, you know. So
yeah, I mean, you've hit something on that, because I've spoken to my community mental health team, because I still have my mental health team, and I'm still very much on my own recovery and still trying to do all this. So I do 100% get the meaningful connections, and I've been a bit mad on LinkedIn, and I've been really connecting with as many people as I can, but on a personal level. So I am that person who has sat up till 1 o'clock this morning sending personal messages out, and because I don't, you know, I'm just a person who managed to survive and is finally getting support and has realised that there's this really big fundamental mental health crisis in this country. And shockingly and statistically, I can sort of rattle them off. You know, there was an increase of 13% from 2018 to 2019 in suicides. And that was from the Office of National Statistics. You know, and that's scary. And it's, you know, there's just always this talk about, oh, you know, mental health and more needs to be done. And, you know, like yourself, I thought, well, no, I don't want to just be that person saying more needs to be done. I'm just going to take my little tenacious personality and make sure that everybody knows what I'm, that, you know, and this is why I took the time today working with some service unit users who are reached out, because it, you know, it's genuine, and it's, you know, I'm not sort of saying anything different. I'm saying, look, do you know what? I am that person. I'm the person like you who's feeling hopeless today. And I know that the support's out there. It's just not enough talked about.
And that feeling hopeless is fine. That's
okay. Yeah.
It's okay to feel hopeless, you know, it's fine. It is an emotion we can feel, you know, and if you start, or if you can kind of accept that's okay, it's here where we get healing, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, and I am in a much better place now, and but I was saying to my community mental health team, you know, this questionnaire that they ask you, you know, like, have you thought of this, have you done this, and it's almost like a score sheet which all the mental health services tend to use. And I just said to her, do you know what? I said, nobody knew how poorly I was getting, like yourself, and it was a bit of a shock when I did go into crisis, because nobody saw it coming, because I didn't talk. And so I will 100% back you up on that. Talking is so important. You know, and it's and I came up with the traffic light system, which I've been implementing with my users. So, you know, even if you just don't feel like talking, it's a, you know, send a green heart, a green emoji, or anything to say, you know, green, I'm okay today. Yellow, I'm not okay, but do you know what? We've worked on a safety plan. So if I send that, this is what we're going to do. And red is, I'm really not okay, and we need to now implement my safety plan to make sure that I'm safe. And when I spoke to the user, she's such a lovely girl, and she was really like, that's such a good idea. Like, I don't want to talk to people, and but just been able to reach out. And that actually came when I had COVID, and I was so poorly, I could barely hold my phone. And my friend said to me, just send me a heart so I know you're okay. And that's all I did for about a week, is I just sent a purple heart every day, every a couple of hours, every time I came round to consciousness, so she knew I was okay. And that was, and you know, I'm that person that lies there having COVID, can't breathe, and I'm like, this is a good idea for mental health. But yeah, so I do, yeah, I just think there seems to be a lot of these scales, and, you know, sort of the one with all the smiley faces from red to green, and, you know, like this, you can't, and if very often people are going into crisis, they're not going to be honest.
No.
They're not going to say, do you know what, I'm a number one today, or I am thinking of hurting myself, or I am feeling hopeless, I am feeling that life's too hard. A lot of people don't, and you see this a lot when people realize, I didn't even know they were sad, and then obviously you get the knock on the door. So it's one of my things that I'm hoping to talk to Parliament about, and obviously as I start to do work within the councils, and, you know, there's sort of quite a lot within the hub that I'm wanting to do, is to kind of just get a user-friendly system, you know, that allows people to be honest, and also one of the elements as well is training frontline responders to see the signs that of somebody who is potentially in crisis but isn't going to be open and honest. And, you know, I'm hoping to sort of connect with like the Cheshire Fire Service and all of these things, like yourself, the police, because when you're sort of trained, when you're going into anything like that, it's very theoretically trained. And I think with mental health at times, it's helpful to have that sort of life experience, or at least somebody talk to you about what it's like to be the person on the other side. So yeah, and there are certainly things that you can be looking out for, that I think if more responders were aware, then they would be able to sort of catch it before they get the next call to say that person is now, sort of in a state of crisis. So, but yeah, I mean, do you find that in the fire service?
Yeah, you'd be amazed at how many kind of, and we call them concerns for welfare calls, and we do get them. People at crisis point, whether they be on top of something or in something or surrounded by something. There's many reasons why the fire service can become sort of involved in that. They're very difficult situations. I think at the time in the services we get to that, we're involved. It's very much kind of protection. We're there to stop the worst from happening, and after that, it's where that person will be taken after that I think is the big place that would need restructuring. I mean, they often go to A&E where they're told, well, you're in crisis, but not that in crisis that we can help you, which I always find bizarre. So back on the street, if you need us, give us a ring, and then it's kind of, well, I needed you half an hour ago. It's I think it's there where really big shifts can be made, and always, there's a scheme, I can't remember which country, I think it's Denmark, that are starting mental health ambulances, and I think that might be the way to go, because I think it's Denmark, is that right? I'm not sure.
I can't off the top of my head, but
one of those sort of Scandi countries that always do things 10 times better than us.
Well, I agree. I think if you speak to anybody who's on the front line, and I've spoken to police officers and social workers, and it's not just your responders. Social workers are finding it very pressured and and frustrating, because they'll kind of try and get the help to keep families together. And it's just this is why I started the hub. It was to catch the people that fell between the holes in the system, and so the hope is as people are referred into the system, then we would be notified, so that we can make sure that they're aware of local support as well whilst they're waiting for the mental health service. So yeah, I think you're right. I think it's sort of, once they're brought into a safe place, nothing's been done to make sure that they are actually getting the help they need. And I've seen it myself going into A&E, and and they'll sort of be sent home, and then, like you say, a week later they're back in with worse injuries. So it is something that I am hoping to be a bulldog about. And I think when you've been in the system as well, you see the flaws, and you see, like, I know I was asking everybody for help, and I was just pushed from waiting list to waiting list to, and then I would have to talk about a lot of stuff at the time that was very traumatic and be triaged, and then they say, right, off you go, and you'll hear from us in 3 months. But I was walking out that door very, very emotionally vulnerable. And and sort of, so this is why I became so passionate. And it was when I got so ill that I sort of got into crisis, and there was a concern for welfare and all of that I then said, this, I don't want another person to have to go through this. And it's a simple solution. So I'm just
it's a big solution. it's a big
simple
piece of work.
idea.
It's a simple theory.
Yeah. It's a simple idea. I mean, obviously I am reaching out to various trying to get as many people behind this as I can, just to help me with this. I can't do it on my own.
No, God, no.
There's so many amazing small charities that are started up by people who, like you and me, and that just want to make a difference and want to save lives. And those are the charities that I really want to work with.
You'll find they'll do the most good as well. You mentioned something before, and I wanted to kind of ask you about it. You said that you're talking about people who fall through the cracks, and I think what can be interesting is, where do you think those cracks are? What do you think they are?
It's in the referral process.
I think it's just purely referral. What gets people to that point, though? Where are we? Why have we got this crisis in the first place? I mean, if you're ever going to, we can put in as many things in. And don't get me wrong, I completely respect what it is you're trying to do. I really do. But there's always a phase before it, isn't there? So people are going unwell to places, and that can be tackled. But what's causing that? Do you feel that sort of original state of people being unwell?
Oh,
So we can answer that when we won't be needed at all, will we? We can just drift off into the sunset and,
do you know what it is? And I think if stepping out of what we can actually do to try and make a difference within the mental health service, but actually look at why we've got this increase of people who are developing anxiety and all of these things. My opinion is it's almost like as a species we've evolved, and we're sort of, like you say, more into technology, and if you look at the 60s, they were about free love and the pill, and all of those sort of 50s, 60s, 70s was about and every kind of decade has what it's known for. I think the millennial, I can't even say the word. It's like that's
the millennials.
The generation of technology, and unfortunately what's brought with that is this unrealistic perception of what we think life should be, because everybody has a perfect life on social media, and they're madly in love, and they're doing well with their job and all of this, but actually they're probably sat very depressed behind that phone, making it out that they're a lot better than they are, or they, a lot more well than they are. And so then that starts a chain of, like you say, that pressure. And society, I don't know how we got to this point where society is just sort of set us up to fail in a lot of ways by saying that we've got to be doing this, and we've got to strive for this, and we've got to have a career, and regardless if you're a man or a woman, I think you have various different pressures regarding to your atypical gender. Obviously, we have to acknowledge that gender is a wider spectrum now, but people have those expectations, and even within the LGBTQ community, there's all sorts of expectations as well. But and I think this is I think really when you break it down, I think we're sort of got to this point where we're overstimulated with all this pressure of longer working hours. There needs to be done, businesses are sort of putting more pressure on people to work longer hours, or, there's no work-life balance. And then you've got the added pressure of finances and all of that. So I think that's fundamentally the start of the crack. And I think I'm not even going to attempt to tackle that, because I'm not a god. I can't make magic. But what I can say is, the mental health service in this country is separated into 3 tiers. So you've got tier 1, which is your first referral. Then you've got your tier 2, which is your sort of secondary recovery. I am going to apologise to all the listeners that have heard barking, squeaking, and all sorts. Teddy has well and truly been trying to make himself known, so I do apologise. And he's like scratching my foot now. But yeah, so I think what happens is you sort of get put into this first tier, but because we're within the NHS, mental health services are very, very understaffed. There's a long waiting period. Yeah, so regardless of where you are within that referral process or how ill you are, everybody says your first point of call is your GP, where you get put into referral, but that could take 3 months. And in that time, nobody's reached out to you, and nobody is actually just saying, just check it in, and kind of monitoring that person to see how far they are in crisis. Are they closer to the edge than somebody who's, just had a sort of, I'm not going to say that, because it feels like I'm trivializing different people's trauma, and everybody's trauma is a personal thing. But, and I think that's the start of the crack. So you've got your so it's all about, it's how do you say? it's not safeguarding, but it's sort of that referral process. So you've got your GPs referring in, you've got the police doing referrals in, social care, you've got so you've got all these referrals coming in, and they're just going to a big pile, and it's almost like you get forgotten. And there are people that are literally just falling through the cracks because they're so overwhelmed with initial tier 1, and it wasn't until I got to tier 2, obviously being in secondary recovery services, that I then was getting all of this support. And, I got a community mental health nurse, and I had the crisis team coming in, I had this and that. And they're like, oh, well, you're in secondary recovery now, so you're eligible for all of this counselling and all of this. And I said to my community mental health nurse, I said, why has it taken for me to get to that point for you now to be able to say, right, you can have all of this? Shouldn't ideally it be starting when you're coming into the system to prevent so it's almost like a bottleneck, and then all of a sudden you sort of get through the sort of bit, and then they're just overwhelmed. So yeah, I think so I've looked at it individually, because what I also realised is that every individual area or council has different services. So they'll have different smaller charities within that sort of area that are waiting to help support, but that nobody knows about. I actually didn't know about half of the charities that I now have help with on my doorstep because nobody told me. Sure. So that's ideally why I started the hub. And it was kind of just to say, right, there needs to be a better way of assessing, who really needs to be triaged ASAP, and who can perhaps be supported with smaller charities to then be assessed. And that's what I say when I said that there's real holes in the system, because when you seem to get referred, it's like a black hole, and it's literally gets triaged. It took 3 months for me to be triaged. It took 10 months for me to see anybody. And in that time, I was very suicidal. I was very unwell, and nobody seemed to really, I didn't have anyone to talk to. Yeah. So that's really when why I started the hub up. And it was kind of just to be somebody who could kind of say, right, well, that person's come into the system. Right, well, it's not likely they're going to be triaged. There's a 2-year waiting list for therapies in Stockport. And so it's like, well, they're not likely to get trauma therapy or that sort of thing. So let's get them in touch with Anxiety UK. Let's get them in touch with, there's a new counselling program for people who sort of with depression and it's like a group therapy, and it's all about learning skills to deal with your illness. Let's get them that help in the meantime. And at least then we're sort of controlling the fire before it just gets to the part where that person doesn't have a way out. Yeah. And it shouldn't ever get to that point, because there are so many people. And I personally have had 10 people, acquaintances or known people to me on Facebook and that sort of thing, that have ended their lives already this year. That's a lot. It shouldn't have to get to that point before, because I was lucky enough to survive. A lot of people aren't. No, I hear that. Yeah. And so that is why I think I'm like, I am so focused and driven in doing this, because I just know that if just by just having knowing that what you've got available to you is, because one of I always say about mental health is that it's the loneliest illness you could ever have. It's a feeling of just, I felt so alone. And Teddy is just on one. I'm so sorry. It's because I'm ignoring him. So it's guest appearance of Teddy, the therapy dog. So it is very lonely. It's one of, I think that's the thing is, and if you don't know of the support that you could be getting, you feel like, I think that's when those thoughts start coming into your mind, where you think, well, if I disappeared, would anybody even know?
No, definitely. I had it described to me by a client once who was very unwell and kind of had attempted to take his own life or complete suicide a couple of times, and we managed to work with him and thankfully got him through all that. But he described it to me beautifully once, and he said we are all, or human beings are the only sort of species that knows that one day it will die, and it's also one of the only species that can kind of imagine bringing that forward. And he said when you get to a place where your brain is sort of not your friend, it's collapsing, you feel so insular, you feel like you're almost sort of shuttling down into your own body, that the mind becomes this fertile ground for sort of acknowledging those kind of thoughts, that, well, I don't have to be here anymore, I don't need to be here anymore, this will end one day anyway, and it sort of becomes like fertile ground for those seeds to grow. And that has always stayed with me, that when he said that to me, it was for someone in so much kind of pain to sort of be so poetic about it. I was really struck by that, and it really helped me kind of understand where that was being. I guess I'm fortunate that I've never been to that place. I know I was quite poorly, but whilst I can, again, it was the mechanism that I understood of where suicidal thinking could begin, and it was that mechanism that I really started to understand. But I guess I'm fortunate enough I didn't get to that place where I actually considered it. But hearing that from that client really stayed with me and made it very understandable to me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it's hard to understand and comprehend until somebody can put it into words there, who's been there, and explain. So I have a lot of people say to me, but what do you mean? And then I kind of say to you at that point, you do believe that it's so much better for everybody, for you. It's an end to your suffering. And it's only when you sort of manage to get out of that sort of state, that you then look back and think, I'm so sorry, everybody.
Right.
But yeah, so Teddy's putting his 2p worth in. But yeah, so is there anything else you want to talk about? Final thoughts, words for anybody listening?
Well, for anybody listening, I suppose, we've just finished Mental Health Awareness Week, haven't we? And the message was kindness, and I think we can. The way I tried to interpret that was, and one thing I think we can miss sometimes is we take kindness as an external thing, something that we sort of throw at somebody else and something that we pass on to other people. And I think if you want to change and cultivate a healthier mind, then try turning that kindness back inward on yourself, and be kind to yourself is probably the best starting point. Be kind to your negative thoughts. Be kind when you feel low or depressed. Be kind when you feel anxious. We're all kind of just doing our best with what we've got, and the kinder you can be to yourself, you'll see that starting to pay with dividend of how you feel. And it's absolutely okay sort of not to be okay. So from the Anxious Fireman, I'm out.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so
I love that.
Thank you. Oh, Johnny or the Anxious Fireman. That was it. Oh, that's made me feel a bit teary, I'm going to be honest.
I know.